The smile looked steady, the words sounded confident, but behind that carefully controlled moment, something was already cracking, and the numbers were quietly screaming a very different story.
Prince Harry and Invictus. His games could get cancelled.
Now this is seismic.
It is such an honor to be here tonight, celebrating all of you and supporting my husband in the Invictus Games, which he founded 4 years ago.
First, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Invictus Games 2025 Organizing Committee for their sheer passion and hard work in making these extraordinary games possible.
The cameras captured Prince Harry standing tall, speaking about beginnings, about momentum, about something bigger than the moment. But what they didn't capture was the invisible weight pressing down behind the scenes, a funding gap of over £33 million, a clock ticking 15 months, and a structure that, piece by piece, doesn't quite hold together the way it's being presented. So the question isn't what was said that day, the question is what wasn't said. And more importantly, who already knew. Because when you move past the speeches and into the documents, the tone changes instantly. The reassurance starts to fade. The phrase government-backed begins to look conditional, fragile, almost misleading.
Adversely affected by the ongoing toxic and poisonous personal saga of Harry and Meghan.
The reality? Only $3 million released from a $26 million pledge. The rest? Locked, held behind thresholds that haven't been met, quietly waiting for private money that hasn't arrived. And suddenly, that safety net everyone assumed was there isn't really there at all. It's not gone, but it's not guaranteed either. And that changes everything. Now place that next to the private funding picture, and the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. 11 sponsors, just 11, where there should be dozens, where there used to be dozens.
Harry's Invictus Games might not make it to their next chapter, and this time the crack is not coming from an online petition.
$4 million in estimated contributions, some not even cash. Services, promises, partial support dressed up as full commitment. And when you run the numbers, really run them, you hit the same wall every time. $7 million available, $40 million required. A gap that doesn't look like a gap anymore, it looks like a cliff edge. And here's where the pattern starts to form. Because this isn't just about missing money, it's about disappearing confidence. And nothing exposes that faster than who chooses to stay and who quietly steps away. Think about Vancouver. Think about scale. 44 corporate partners, 2 major anchors holding the entire structure together. And then look at Birmingham. Look at what's missing. Look at what's gone. One detail stands out more than any other. Boeing.
Reporting that Invictus itself is losing sponsors, headline backer Boeing among them.
A name that doesn't just sponsor it signals trust, stability, serious backing. And now, not there. That absence doesn't just remove funding, it creates a ripple. Questions start forming behind closed doors. Conversations shift. Why did they leave? Becomes the question no one wants to ask out loud, but everyone is thinking. And once that question exists, it spreads. Quietly, quickly, until suddenly the entire sponsorship structure starts to feel uncertain. And uncertainty is contagious.
There is a petition live on the internet right now demanding that Harry be removed from the Invictus Games.
11 sponsors where there should be closer to 40. That's not a slowdown. That's a contraction, a visible one, a measurable one. And when even the largest confirmed partner isn't fully cash-based, the picture sharpens even more. Because this isn't just about how much is missing, it's about how much was expected and never came. And then something even more unsettling happens. A government doesn't just hesitate, it pulls out completely. Australia, not a small contributor, not an insignificant player, a country that had been part of the structure, and suddenly gone, funding withdrawn, support redirected. And here's the detail that changes the entire interpretation. They didn't cut spending, they increased it. Billions into defense, hundreds of millions into veteran support. Just not here. Not this. That's not a financial limitation. That's a decision, a deliberate one. And decisions like that don't happen without context, without cause. And when you place that alongside the unresolved questions surrounding travel, funding, and accountability questions that were never fully answered, the silence starts to feel louder than any explanation ever could.
News that a petition is gathering pace demanding that Harry is removed from the Invictus Games.
because when something isn't addressed, it doesn't disappear. It lingers, it builds, it shapes perception. And perception in a structure like this is everything. Now bring the host city into focus. Birmingham, a city already under pressure, a city that has already faced collapse, a city that doesn't have the financial flexibility to absorb risk. And yet, somehow, it's expected to carry an event sitting on a £40 million uncertainty. That contradiction alone should raise questions. But it doesn't stop there, because the deeper you go, the more uncomfortable it becomes. This isn't just about funding anymore, it's about alignment, about timing, about whether all the pieces that are supposed to support this actually can. And right now, the answer isn't clear. It's fragmented, incomplete, and surrounded by silence, because no one has clearly said what happens if the money doesn't come in. And that might be the most important detail of all. And just when it seems like the situation couldn't get any more fragile, the numbers start telling a story that no press release can soften, no public statement can spin, and no silence can fully hide. Because when you open the official filings, when you go line by line through what the Invictus Games Foundation itself has submitted, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Income rising, reserves growing, structures expanding. And yet, the most direct form of support, the actual money reaching veteran organizations, drops sharply, not slightly, not gradually, by 63%. That's not a fluctuation. That's a shift. And it raises a question that sits on tenor of everything in a year where more money came in. Why did less go out to the people the foundation exists to serve? The answer isn't written there. The filings don't explain it. They simply present the numbers cold and precise, leaving the interpretation hanging in the air. And that silence becomes even more noticeable when you see what else changed at the same time. Legal fees more than tripled. No clear breakdown, no detailed explanation. Just a jump that stands out the moment you compare one year to the next. Then there's the payment to Dunes LC. Documented, recorded, but without context. No description, no explanation of purpose. And then, just as suddenly, it disappears from the following year's filing entirely. No follow-up, no clarification. It's there, and then it's not. And that kind of financial footprint doesn't just fade without leaving questions behind, because this is where the distinction becomes critical. The foundation says 92% of its spending goes toward charitable activities, and technically that can be true. But when charitable activities include operational costs, staffing, logistics, infrastructure, when the definition stretches to cover everything required to run the event itself, the meaning starts to blur. Because running the games and directly supporting veterans are not the same thing. They overlap, yes, but they are not identical. And the numbers show that difference clearly, even if the language around them does not. Now layer that over the broader context, and the scale becomes even more striking. Major international events costing tens of millions. Comparable competitions operating on fractions of that budget. And suddenly, the question isn't just about whether the money is there, it's about how much is needed, how it's being used, and whether that structure is sustainable under the current pressure. Because pressure is exactly what's building. And then comes the signal that insiders understand better than anyone else. People leaving. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. Melanie P. stepping down from a position that, by its nature, is meant to represent stability and oversight. No public explanation. No detailed reasoning. Just an exit at a moment when continuity would matter most. And when someone with that level of experience chooses to walk away during a period of scrutiny, it doesn't just register, it resonates. But it doesn't stop there, because beyond the boardroom, something else is happening quietly in the background. Recruitment efforts that don't quite succeed. Conversations that end the moment certain details are revealed. Candidates stepping back before they even step in. And that pattern, subtle but consistent, creates a different kind of pressure. The kind that doesn't show up in budgets or filings, but directly affects the ability to deliver what's been promised. Because delivering an event of this scale isn't theoretical. It requires people. Experienced people. People who know how to manage complexity, coordinate across nations, build systems under tight timelines. And when those people hesitate, when they decline, when they choose not to be part of it, that hesitation becomes part of the story. A quiet indicator that something, somewhere, doesn't fully add up. And this is where everything converges. Because this isn't just another project facing challenges. This is the one platform that still carries weight. The one association that still connects to something tangible, something respected, something real. And that's exactly why the stakes feel higher. Because if this holds, it stabilizes everything around it. But if it doesn't, if the funding gap remains, if the structure doesn't solidify, if the timeline runs out, the consequences don't stay contained. They ripple outward. Because when you look at everything that came before, the pattern becomes clearer. Partnerships shifting, projects underperforming, forming, structures changing, and one by one, the pillars that were supposed to define a long-term path begin to look less certain, until what remains is this. Invictus, not just as an event, but as a symbol, as a measure of credibility, as something that has to work not just for visibility, but for the people at the center of it. And those people, the competitors, the veterans, the ones training right now, they're not part of the calculations being debated behind closed doors. They're not involved in the funding structures or the sponsorship negotiations or the internal decisions reflected in the filings. They're preparing, they're committing, they're building towards something that from their perspective is real, fixed, certain. But is it? Because that's the question that hasn't been answered. Not clearly, not directly. What happens if the numbers don't align in time? What happens if the conditions tied to funding aren't met? What happens if the structure that's supposed to support everything doesn't fully come together? The possibility isn't theoretical anymore. It's present, it's measurable, and it's getting closer with every passing month, which brings everything back to that moment at the beginning. The confidence, the certainty, the statement that this was just the beginning. Because maybe it was, maybe it still is, but beginnings only matter if they lead somewhere stable, somewhere secure, somewhere that can actually hold under pressure. And right now, the pressure is building, quietly, consistently, and no one has clearly said what happens next.